Good morning, everybody. I'm Steve Mellings from ADISA. I know many of you who are joining the call. So nice to see you this morning. We are here to introduce a new ITAD certification called the ITAD Essentials. And the premise for today's webinar is really just to tell you a little bit more about ITAD Essentials, but also to answer some of the questions which have already been raised to us about this new certification. And I know a lot of you will probably groan, another certification, another standard to adhere to. So before we sort of talk about why we've done this, going to talk about the genesis perhaps of ADISA a little bit, if we may. The first thing that's come up when we've talked to existing certified companies about ITAD Essentials is what's happened to Standard 8. The answer is nothing. Standard 8 still exists. It's our premier gold standard for companies who recover ICT assets in the UK and the EU. And the reason why it's in those jurisdictions is it's been aligned to law, as you know. So it's an official UK GDPR certification scheme, which is the highest accolade we can get for the ITAD. And it's going through the EU Data Protection Board as we speak now. And I know several of you are from mainland Europe. Marcin, good morning, Marcin. And that's going to take some time. The application went in about 9 or 10 months ago. It's passed the Irish Data Commission now, and it's got to go through Brussels and find 27 member states agreement. And I think that's going to be quite challenging. However, Standard 8 exists. We're massively committed to it. It is our premier standard for the ITAD sector. And it's going to be here for the next umpteen years because of the time that we've put into it. So for all of you who are Standard 8 already, don't panic. We're not withdrawing from the Standard 8. It's the standard that we will be presenting to government, and it's the one that we push into entities like CUPAS, the Commodity Usage Principles and Assurance Scheme. So it is our premier standard. However, during our time working with companies towards Standard 8, we were approached by many in different jurisdictions. Tokyo, Auckland, Australia, I should say, New Zealand, the US, companies who wanted to work with ADISA for ITAD certification, but the GDPR piece wasn't relevant because of the different legal jurisdictions. And so last year, we launched something called the Ellison Test. Now, the Ellison Test was designed to focus just on the act of data sanitisation. So those of you who know us will know that we have a test lab where we test sanitisation products, and we've got some proprietary techniques to verify that data is no longer recoverable from storage media. And so what we did is that we lifted some of those techniques and we built a field forensic kit, and we went out looking to evaluate the act of data sanitisation. That was my idea, my design, and I actually got it wrong. I don't mind admitting that. The Ellison Test is brilliant. We did several pilots with it, and we were able to find issues associated with data sanitisation, but there was a big but. During the test process at some of the sites, we saw additional risk. So not just from the act of sanitisation, we saw other areas within those businesses that had too high a risk. And so that caused us concern. We felt that by focusing on just that narrow area, we would be giving a badge, if you like, to organizations where within their service delivery, there was still too high risk for their customers, both to the physical asset and also in some instances to the logical asset, the data. And so we went back to the drawing board a little bit and said, okay, what were we trying to achieve? Why are we not able to address these other areas of risks while we're doing the Ellison Test? And this is really what the premise for ITAD Essentials was. We went back to basics, and James Derrick, who may be on the call, thank you, James, he emailed me ADISA Standard 1 from his archives. And what we did back in 2010 was that we'd identified risks in the ITAD process, and then through the specification of the standard, we determined the controls that you should put in place. And so we went right back to basics and said, okay, there's still the same risks in the ITAD. What we need to do is to introduce something that is perhaps more flexible. And so what we've done with ITAD Essentials is that we've created a more flexible certification for ITAD. The 21 risks are still the same, and we'll talk about those in a second. However, the major difference with ITAD Essentials is that the standard itself does not tell you how to manage those risks. It is up to the applicants to suggest how they manage those risks. And we'll talk about this in a little bit more detail later on. But this is the fundamental difference between ITAD Essentials and all other ITAD certifications, is that the standard isn't as prescriptive, certainly as Standard 8, and also some other standards. And this allows for a much more flexible approach for the ITAD operator. Now, we've been listening to organizations, and there's another slide about the target market for this, but we've been listening to organizations worldwide about what their business needs. And where Standard 8, for example, didn't necessarily work for one of our clients in Japan, is that it was just too prescriptive for the local market. All the GDPR piece that was built into it was irrelevant. Japanese law, data protection law, doesn't even have the concept of controller and processor. And so Essentials really wouldn't work, but their motivation to work with ADISA was high. And so what we've been able to do is to introduce a certification that can be applicable in Tokyo. It can be applicable in Toronto. I can think of other cities beginning with T if I was smart, but I can't. The idea is that it's a pan-jurisdiction certification. Because it doesn't specify what you need to do, it also allows different types of businesses to be applied. So, for example, we talk about this in another slide. A business that provides ITAD services is a very small part of its broader business service portfolio. When you look at Standard 8 and even standards like R2v3, which is a fantastic standard, the controls that you have to put in place are so significant that it becomes very much a burden for a company that only does ITAD in a small part of its business to carry. And so ITAD Essentials, because it's so flexible, can be applied to different types of business. Not just ITAD is 100% of business, but ITAD could be a small part of the business. The key bit to talk about here, and when we did the presentation to the current certified group in January, this is the bit I labored. The quality of the test, the certification, if you like, is still going to be the same. It's still going to be the same audit rigor. This is not a giveaway badge. Businesses are going to need to earn this badge. So we're going to make sure that the controls that are in place are fit for purpose, and I'll explain how that's assessed later. And what we've done is that we have taken the Ellison Test and we've now wrapped it into the assessment being made for ITAD Essentials certification and also Standard 8. So we will be bringing laboratory level of techniques out, and we will be assessing how you sanitize storage media. And this, we feel, provides a really, really high level of scrutiny for any ITAD. Standard 8, GDPR compliance, the highest level. Essentials, more flexible, can be applied to different types of organizations, both underpinned by strong auditing and by the Ellison Test, so that data is being managed appropriately. Now, who are we aiming at? Is this land grab and another certification? Well, not necessarily. As I mentioned previously, we've been approached by organizations worldwide to work with us because the reputation that we have is that we really understand data sanitization. And so before we had ITAD Essentials, we only really had Standard 8, and that didn't apply in these jurisdictions because the GDPR wasn't relevant. Ellison Test, as we mentioned, there were peripheral risk that we weren't there to assess. I used the analogy actually in an internal meeting where it's a bit like a fire person going in to put a fire out and putting the fire out which they were called to, but seeing one over there and not doing anything about it. So Ellison Test was too narrow, too blinkered. And so what Essentials does, it enables it to be applied in different jurisdictions. So all those companies who we've already started reaching out to will start to be able to work towards a certification from ADISA that manages risk appropriately. We're also aware that many of you operate in the channel. So you will sell your ITAD services to a systems integrator, an advisory, a reseller, who will have all the touch points with the customers. And where Standard 8 is concerned with GDPR, that makes you a sub-processor. And it can be very challenging for you to sit behind a channel partner to actually achieve Standard 8 because you're one off the customer. And we've addressed that by removing that whole GDPR wraparound and making this just about risk. So for those of you who operate predominantly in the channel, this could be hugely advantageous for you because you're no longer asking your channel partner questions which they may feel are too intrusive in the commercial agreements they have in place. There's also a whole bunch of companies who don't require third-party GDPR compliance. And it could be that you're large enough to have done this yourself. You don't need a ADISA Standard 8 to help you verify compliance, that you have sufficient resource internally to be able to understand what GDPR means within the ITAD piece. And GDPR means much more than just a certificate of destruction. There's a whole bunch of stuff within Article 28, for example, on EU and UK that you need to comply with. And you could be large enough to have done this yourself. So you don't need a ADISA to tell you how to comply with the law. There's also organizations, which I mentioned, which don't just do ITAD. It could be waste management organizations. It could be that you're a data recovery company. I know one is joining the call today, that you provide data sanitization services and a small part of ITAD within your business. And Essentials is really designed to be flexible enough to adapt to your business itself. It's really designed, I think, as well to reflect. I've been around the ITAD sector since the mid-90s, and I've seen it mature massively, hugely, I think. It's a very, very smart industry now. I think we're really beginning to move towards being a very, very professional service-led industry. And I think as a result of that, we need to reflect that standards can actually be too restrictive for many businesses. So by determining how you're meant to operate your business at times means that it's quite a burden for you to carry. And so Essentials for those businesses who want to be able to operate how they want to run, Essentials can really adapt for that as well, because it doesn't prescribe what you're required to do. We're going to look at the standard itself, I think. Oh, I stress I missed that bit. I laboured that on the previous slide. This isn't a gimme. This isn't an easy thing to go through. The same level of quality would be expected as all the ADISA certifications. When you submit your control, you better make sure that that control is in place, not just once, twice, 3 times, but all the time. Otherwise, the risk would be too high. And so we're going to explain a little bit about how we assess risk. But the fundamental is that risk must be managed, both to the physical asset and the logical asset. So there are 5 areas, I should say, within the Essentials standard. Risk area 1 is logistics, and you'll be very familiar with some of these headings, those of you who've been with us for a long time within Standard 8, because these are largely the same headings that we had in Standard 1 back in 2010. The risk of not knowing where you're collecting from, whether it's access to the building or the location of that building, can increase risk because of transport time from the office, for example, to a vehicle that may be parked further away. So we're looking at how you manage that risk. If you're using hubs, in other words, a storage area where you hold data carrying assets on the way back to the facility, we need to understand how you're managing that risk. Lots of different ways of that being managed, but we would be looking at what you're doing, not necessarily telling you what you should be doing. Need to manage the risk of the vehicle stopping. Is it unexpected? If vehicles stop, traffic lights, road accidents, fueling stops, comfort breaks. How are you managing those risks? If you're using a third party, how are you managing the control of the service that they're providing for you? Now you get the idea. I'm not going to run through every one of these, but the premise is very much is that there is a risk, and there are components within that risk that you would need to manage. And most of you, because of what I've just said, the industry has evolved, will be managing these risks, whether you understand it as risk management or just the service that you deliver. And so Essentials really is about you stating what you currently do and an analyst evaluating whether they feel it's fit for purpose or not. But risk areas, 1 is logistics. 2 is asset management. A fundamental of ITAD is to manage the physical asset. And we want to make sure that from the point of collection through to the point of data safe, the asset is being under control. We want to make sure that you are reporting back to your customers accurate inventories. We want to make sure that anomalies that appear within the process, which we all know are dealt with appropriately. We want to make sure that when a data carrying asset gets into your facility, that it's processed appropriately. We see triage at the goods in shutter, to use that analogy, where a lack of understanding about what could carry data often leads to the wrong type of stream for data carrying assets to go down. And we've seen that data leakage can happen as a result of that. And this is all that we'll assess in this area, which is how are you managing the asset from collection through to data safe. The third risk area is physical security. You're taking a data carrying asset from a customer's secure environment and you're putting it into your own secure environment. We need to make sure that that secure environment is indeed secure. We'll be looking at how you are protecting your facility from break-ins. Once an intruder is inside, would they be picked up? Are you doing anything to decrease the attractiveness of your facility to a casual opportunist? And then if you've got partners, people coming into the facility, how are you managing that risk? And then finally, the insider theft. How are you managing the risk associated with that? Now, you will all be doing this. Every ITAD that we visit, I visited one in January, who, by his own admission, has said that he doesn't feel that he's ready for even ITAD Essentials certification. But they had all of the components that we look for within this area managed. He just wasn't aware of that. The fourth area that we look for is process control. For me, this is one of the biggest risks that we see. Asset management is also one of the things that organizations who are perhaps on the periphery of being certified are not so strong on, but process control is critical. There's a slightly myopic view that once an asset has arrived at a facility, it's secure. It isn't until it's been data safe. Or made data safe, it isn't secure. And if we're mixing our processing streams, there's a very significant risk of a data carrying asset leaving the premises without being processed appropriately. And we have seen this in countless examples over the many, many years. And what we're looking for within process control is what you're doing to make sure that data carrying assets are processed accordingly. We don't tell you how to do that. Contamination segregation can be up to you. You can use logical process, in other words, a system-led process. You can use stickers if you want. You can use dedicated areas. It is entirely up to you. But what we're looking to do is to say, are you managing that risk? Divisions of responsibilities is really important. There's a phrase in the auditing world about you can't mark your own work. And so fundamentally, this is the same when you're talking about process control. You can't have somebody who's in charge of a process effectively then saying that that process is complete. And we're making sure that the key areas within ITAD, that there is a second check on an activity taking place to make sure that the human, because we're all human, the human hasn't made an error which has led to uncontrolled risk. The final area that we look for is sanitisation itself. This is the Ellison Test. This is where we'll come, as we've been doing to Standard 8 organizations over the last 3 years, and really looking at how you're sanitizing media. Media sanitization is very challenging. The software vendors, in my opinion, don't project how challenging it is. We know this because we test products. We have tested over 25 now. I think we're on test 27 products against IEEE 2883 and NIST 888. We have only certified 9 actually, I think, from last week. So this gives you an example of how challenging data sanitization is. And so what we do within ITAD Essentials and Standard 8 is that we make sure that this part of the process is really robust. It's been aligned to dial 1 of the data capability requirements so that all the Standard 8 organizations will know exactly what they're meant to be doing. But this is the minimum requirement that we would expect, which basically is a clear within the IEEE and NIST 888 parlance. So we've been talking about risk. How on earth do we score risk? Because it could be viewed as subjective. It is going to be opinion based, of course it is. And one of the beauties of ITAD Essentials when we've piloted this is the discussions that take place with the applicant or the ITAD, and the analyst or auditor. We're not quite sure what to term them as yet. Your control when you submit it. So there's a submission form, which we'll talk about in a second, where it will say, this is the risk, how are you managing it? So you'll make a submission. That will get evaluated. If the risk mitigation we don't feel is acceptable or sufficient, you won't move further forward. But if we believe that the written word, i.e. what you're claiming that you do, is sufficient, you move forward to actually a site audit. During that site audit, they'll be looking at that control, and they'll be looking at the environmental factors, whether it's an operational control or a procedural control, and they'll be looking at whether that control manages that risk appropriately. And if it does to an excellent level, you'll score 1. If it's sufficient, good enough, you'll score 2. If it's insufficient, it'll be 3. You get the idea. And all of this will be documented in a report, of course, so you're able to discuss it with your analyst. The next piece that we look at with the risk management piece is it repeatable? So will that control work all the time? Is there any environmental factors that could undermine that control? Is that control robustly placed within your business? In other words, do your staff understand the process they should follow? Who's checking that process? And again, if it's a repeated outcome and it's always in place, you'll get a 1. Is it regularly in place? 2. If it's irregular, 3. You get the idea. There's going to be a scoring mechanism. Now, for each risk, that's the score that you'll get. So each of the 21 areas of risk, you'll get a score for that. And that leads a residual risk score. Residual risk score of 2 means that you are managing the risk. 3 to 4 means there's opportunity for improvement, and 4 plus would be that there's a non-conformance and there's an improvement required at the overall at the risk level. Now, why 3 to 4 and 4 plus? How can 4 live in 2 separate places? Well, the beauty with ITAD Essentials is it's flexible. There will be times where there still will be residual risk within a particular process, but there may be other elements which can be used to counter that. So a 4, your analyst could have a 4 with this opportunity of improvement, or it could be a 4 where they're just not happy. And this, again, will be part of the discussion that we have with you. At the end, all of the residual scores for all the 21 risks are added up, and the total will give you your overall award. I stress you cannot pass ITAD Essentials if you've got non-conformances at all the 21 levels. So this isn't about adding it up. So you might have 2s everywhere, 1s everywhere, and then 1 non-conformance. I can pass. No, you can't. You have to pass every risk, and then you will get your award. This is quite a new concept, certainly for a certification, but where we're concerned at ADISA, it's largely how we've always operated. How are you implementing the controls that we prescribe, and are they going to stick with business operations as business as usual? And all that we're saying now is that we're not prescribing the control. You say what you do, and we're making sure whether that's fit for purpose and whether it can be delivered consistently with business as usual. So that's a very rapid, and I'm trying to stick this down to 30 minutes today. That's a very rapid introduction to the concept of ITAD Essentials. I'm going to talk through the application process. It's reasonably straightforward. Go to our website. There's some forms. I'll get a link in the final slide here. There's admin, much like everything else. So you'll get a certification agreement. For those of you with Standard 8, you'll know all about that. And that explains the rules of certification between us and you, what we commit to and what you commit to. There will also be an NDA, non-disclosure, as you would have thought. As the disclosing party, we're very happy to sign yours. So if you prefer us to sign your NDA, we will do, but there must be an NDA in place. The cost is £5,500 for a 12-month certification. Again, this is slightly different than other certifications where it's a 3-year, certainly with Standard, 3-year agreement. This is an annual agreement where each year you will need to go through another audit to maintain your certification. It's a reasonably quick process to go from initial interest through to getting an analyst or auditor to come out, because all we're doing is evaluating what you are doing today. So there's no huge amount of transformation needed. If you're operating at the right level, there's no amount of work trying to understand the standard and applying it to your business. This is about you going through the 21 risks and stating what you do, and you do that on a submission form. We then review that, and we come back with any questions, and we ask for any further information. So if there's critical documentation, or you might have a system, for example, this is managed by System X, we may ask for a remote demo of System X before we proceed to see some of its critical functions that underpin your business. And this is all about making sure that when we attend site, that there's no gotchas, that we've asked the right questions before coming out. People are happy that we believe that business as usual, how you run your business, is managing these 21 risks. When we come on site, it's a 2-day audit. The first day will be the operational audit, risks 1 through 4, where we're looking at how you manage the ITAD process. And then the second day, because it's a different set of employees for ADISA, one of our forensic analysts will come out and they'll be looking to perform the Ellison test. And you'll need clearly to put the right type of personnel into that second day, because we will be looking to dive deeply into your data sanitization processes. All of this spits out a report, again, which is going to be slightly different than some of our other reports that we've issued at ADISA. We will be having more commentary about the effectiveness of your controls, the robustness of your controls. And if there is residual risk, we will provide ideas for improvement. We will not tell you that you should do anything. We will provide you with an opinion-based piece about how that particular process could be improved. Or we'll be identifying that it needs to be improved. Where things must be improved, an imperative, it's a non-conformance, it's up to you to improve them. All of this can be done really rapidly. We've had an organization who we met about 10 days ago go through the first phase, and we're just going to be booking their audit in the next 24 hours. And so we expect them to be from application, or interest, I should say, through to certification, assuming that the audit day goes well, to be about 5 weeks, which when you consider a standard like Standard 8 has been taking some organizations up to 18 months. This is a very, very different approach to verifying how good an ITAD is at managing risk. So what next? Bang up on the half hour, which is unusual for me. What next? Well, we have a new website. For those of you who think ADISA is just about ITAD, it's not. The notion of ADISA certified is incorrect. When people are certified by ADISA as a certification body, you should be referencing the standard that you are certified to. So certified Standard 8. Certified ADISA doesn't really work, because we have about 7 or 8 different products now that we certify companies against. And so you might want to have a quick look at the new website to be surprised at the range of services that we now offer. And there are additional services coming out from a new entity called ADISA Assurance, where we will be working specifically in the area of AI assurance and IoT assurance. So ADISA is changing and evolving as a certification body to do more industries and services other than just ITAD. So have a look at the new website. If you want to know more about what we do in the ITAD sector, that's ADISA certification /IT-asset disposition. And you can navigate there, of course, from the main menu. And if you want to find out more about Essentials and receive the pack, there's an inquiry form which you can download or you can complete on the Contact Us menu. But if you want to get going, navigate to the ITAD Essentials page itself, and there's an Apply Now button there. With all of this, we're very happy to field questions, and I think I'm going to open up the Q&A now. I didn't want to do it halfway through because I know that I'd run out of time. But if you want to ask questions, if those of you who know me, ping me an email. I'll answer it directly. Thanks very much, everybody. I'll leave the contact details there. Very happy to field questions on ITAD Essentials. Thank you very much. Enjoy your day, and thanks for joining us this morning.